and they're reading, and I'm feeding in the Adlerian thinking. So they have to keep readjusting. You know, the first week or two, they're really into the biomedical explanation. But then we start getting into what you've got in front of you and their material, and they start going, well, we got to, wait a minute, this doesn't work. We got to change this. So by the end, when they're giving their presentations, many of the groups will say, we're very frustrated because now we're really confused. It seems so simple when we started, but now it doesn't. And even this morning or this afternoon we were meeting, and now we realize we have to change it again because Roger keeps throwing this stuff at us that makes it look different than it did when we started, you know, which is exactly what I want them to do, is feel confused, feel uncertain, not take any party line, particularly about what is dysthymia or what is anorexia nervosa. So that's the strategy, to cause confusion and angst and mental languishing over what is going on here. You know, what are these disorders? Where do they come from? A couple of sidebars on that. A couple in the room, see, it's Herb and Louise and myself and Ruth. We're heading off on May 21st to do a workshop on the new DSM. We have a small group where they're all part of it. We've been meeting to look at the rollout of the new DSM-5, and we've got some other people in the loop that are actually, you know, in the cloud, as Marina would say. Rocky Garrison, Susan Belangi, and so we're preparing ourselves for the new DSM-5, which is, you know, we're going to see how these disorders change. Some are going to be different, some are going to disappear, some are going to be relabeled in certain, or reclassified, you know, in certain ways. So we are doing that. So and that's going to be an interesting struggle at the Adler Graduate School, is how do we transit from DSM-4 to DSM-5, you know? What's the timeline for that? I guess we all know that probably the benchmark date for implementation is when Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota says, we're going to use the new diagnostic codes. That will push everything, you know, to the margins. Everybody's scrambling at that point. At this point, it's sort of a build-out towards what the new DSM will look like. But the Adlerian view of psychopathology remains, and I would say to students, sort of prepping them for this, it'll be unlike any other school of psychology that you hear from. That the way the Adlerian community views the DSM is, views psychopathology is very, very unique. And I'll tell you an interesting story. We had some of you remember her. There was a student who graduated, I guess, about a year or two ago. Her name was Kate Stromberg. And Kate took the 511 class. At the time, she was engaged to a young physician doing his postdoc at Mayo, and she was commuting. And so, so this guy had earned his MD. He was doing his residency at Mayo. And so she came home the night that we went through this and said, wow, I heard this really different view of you know, mental disorders. And she started spewing it out. And this physician, young physician, her husband-to-be, said, what? That is crazy. What? He got really indignant. He said, there is no way you should accept that explanation, like for depression. That is absolutely hogwash. Depression is a physiological brain chemistry problem, and don't let those people ever convince you otherwise. So Kate comes back into the next class period and sits down with her peers, you know, and goes, oh my, you know, she'd like hit a wall because her physician-to-be husband just didn't buy this for a minute, you know, when it comes to. So, you know, we're sort of on a interesting precipice when it comes to how we explain psychopathology or the DSM. So I'll use as the framework for this Adler's circus tent analogy, which some of you have heard, and it's a good one. I know, how many of you have walked the streets of Vienna? I know Herb has. Who else has walked? Bill has. I haven't. I will make the pilgrimage at some point, I guess. Some of you will probably also, but I know that Adler's, one of his first office locations was very near this large park called the Prater. Is that right? And it was right off of the park. And these physicians in that office, in that practice at the time, were treating people, many of transients that were coming through, many of whom would be staying or somehow lodging or camping over there at this large park. Many of them associated with the circuses, the traveling circuses coming through. So I think a metaphor for Adler became talking about psychopathology at what do you want to not call that particularly, but as a circus analogy, the circus tent analogy. So I'll go back to it. So what I'll do is run through these. What I would like to do is go through the material and then come back and talk about it. So I'll click through it, and then we can come back and talk about it, rather than take questions as we go.
Roger. Going back to the thing, I was puzzling about your circus because you put Cirrus there. I thought maybe this is a version of Prius or something.
It is. It is.
So it's a new version, new iteration
of the circus. It's a circus in the cloud.
Oh, I see.
Actually, I just paid our bill for a year of Sirius XM radio.
There you go.
So maybe that's what I had in mind. Anyway,
It's a Freudian slip, right?
Yeah, it was a Freudian slip. Thank you for that. I never even thought it. So we'll talk about the neurotic style of life, how the Adlerian view psychopathology really fits within a diagnostic set of criteria. What is psychopathology? The 100% factor, the 3 social ties, discouragement, neurosis, psychosis, emotions, the hesitating attitude, what constitutes neurotic behavior, symptoms, treatment. And I'll click right along. And
Wow, it's a lot.
it's a lot, but you know it. So you'll just be hearing it. I think maybe many of you for the 900th time and some for the 13th or something. So the first thing to do is to look at these handouts, and the copier decided to get into a lining mode, so everything's got lines. So that was the copier, the big one out in the front area by Margie. So this yesterday we were just lining everything. Well, I will start with this 3-paragraph overview of Adlerian psychotherapy, and because I think it's important, it's endemic certainly to this information. So from the vantage point of Adlerian psychology, we believe that the majority of people suffering from emotional problems are neither disordered nor sick. We tend to avoid stigmatizing people as mentally ill. I say to the class continually, remember, this psychology gets to 80% of the people 80% of the time. It'll never explain 100% of the people 100% of the time. No psychology can.
Right.
So this will not, Adlerian psychology or Adlerian psychotherapy will not work for everyone. For example, this is an insight-oriented therapy. If a person's incapable of insight, you're going to have a hard time really making the whole show fit. There are parts of it that might work, certainly. But so I'm always reminding them, and when they get really so passionate about Adlerian psychotherapy and Adlerian psychology that that's all they see, I say, stop. 80% of the people, 80% of the time, so you've got some work to do. You've got to figure out the other 20%, because Adlerian psychology will not give it to you. To the contrary, in Adlerian psychology, we believe that most emotional problems are the manifestation of discouragement, fear, inferiority feelings, and lack of knowledge about how to find success in one or more of the life tasks: community, friendship, love, sex, and occupation, work. The route out of most emotional problems includes awareness, encouragement, heightened social interest, and retraining. In addition, the importance of developing the courage to be imperfect cannot be overstated. So that is, I think, sort of captures what we